Welcome to this explainer. When we think about mass protests, like the 2016 Jantar Mantar demonstrations in New Delhi, our minds usually jump straight to the loud megaphones, right? The massive, surging crowds. But while all the cameras were squarely focused on those fiery speeches on the front lines, there was a completely different, much quieter operation keeping the entire movement alive. Today, we're stepping away from center stage to dig into this hidden infrastructure, pulling directly from reports and data right off the ground.
So, it really makes you wonder, who actually keeps a protest running? I mean, it's so easy to forget that a prolonged demonstration is basically a temporary city. History always remembers the big leaders and those catchy slogans, sure, but movements of this scale, they rely absolutely heavily on a quiet, behind-the-scenes machinery of just ordinary people. Without them, the whole shebang would literally collapse in a matter of days.
Section 1. The Faces of Protest, Mohammad Junaid's Quiet Work.
Okay, let's dive into this. When we zoom in from that macro view of thousands of people down to the micro level, we find folks like Mohammad Junaid, and his story really captured national attention. Junaid wasn't up on a podium, he wasn't drafting political demands. Instead, he became a highly recognizable face simply by providing basic, essential sustenance. Day after day, week after week, he was just there, serving meals, handing out water. For protesters who travel hundreds of miles to be at Jantar Mantar, these meals weren't just some nice convenience. They were an absolute lifeline.
Section 2. Feeding Jantar Mantar, the Logistical Challenge.
To really grasp Junaid's impact, we have to wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this thing. Prepared food, drinking water, blankets, medical care, medicines, hygiene supplies. Imagine hosting a dinner party for your family. Now multiply that by 10,000, put it outdoors, and don't give it an end date. The daily logistical nightmare of securing and distributing all of this is mind-boggling. This wasn't a catered event, it was essentially a crisis response scenario, which just goes to show how absolutely critical volunteers were for everyone braving the elements day in and day out.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because sustaining those crowds required a complex, multi-step operation. First, individuals and community groups sent in donations from all over the country. Then, organizers on the ground had to somehow juggle online deliveries and physical community kitchens. And finally, volunteers were constantly navigating shifting supply chains. Honestly, it was a roller coaster. Reports showed periods of overflowing donations followed suddenly by massive shortages when delivery networks just broke down.
Section 3. A network of support. Beyond the kitchen.
Now, zooming out slightly, Junaid wasn't doing this in a vacuum. Actually, scratch that, he was part of a much larger, highly organized humanitarian web. And this is a super important piece of the puzzle. Volunteer medical camps were established right there on site to provide first aid and basic healthcare. It's fascinating how organically this whole ecosystem popped up. It wasn't just about food, right? It was ordinary citizens spontaneously organizing to support each other's basic survival and dignity during a massive public demonstration.
Section 4. Allegations and Denials, the Center of Controversy.
Well, as Junaid's profile grew, his story rapidly shifted from quiet volunteerism to breaking national news, and the political tension suddenly spiked. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark, direct contradiction in the public narratives. On one hand, the Cockroach Janata Party alleged that Uttar Pradesh police raided Junaid's home and detained his family, claiming it was targeted harassment over his volunteer work. But right next to that, the Uttar Pradesh police categorically and publicly deny all of those allegations, two completely opposing statements perfectly capturing the intense political friction at the time.
And crucially, we have to look at this objectively. These competing claims have not been independently resolved. As an explainer of the source material, we're strictly looking at the available reporting of an ongoing, highly sensitive situation. At the time these reports came out, discussions between protest reps and the government were still happening, and the actual facts regarding the alleged raid remain totally disputed and unverified.
Section 5. The Human Side. Dividing Public Opinion.
With all these intense allegations flying back and forth, let's just slow down for a second and look at how the public reacted to Junaid being thrust into the political crosshairs. The reaction was incredibly polarized. Supporters immediately hailed him as a symbol of compassion, arguing that feeding hungry people is just a fundamental humanitarian act, completely separate from politics. Meanwhile, others emphasized the absolute need for official investigations to establish the facts before jumping to conclusions. This single story of a man handing out food sparked a massive national conversation about the exact role of humanitarian support during politically charged protests.
So the crucial point is, it ultimately comes down to these unsung roles. Cooks, doctors, drivers, volunteers. No matter where anyone stands on the politics of the Jantar Mantar demonstrations, the fundamental reality is that mass movements require immense labor. They require infrastructure and people who make sure no one goes hungry. These folks, the ones holding the ladles, organizing the medical tents, driving the supply trucks, become intricately woven right into the history of the event itself.
Which brings us to a lingering, pretty provocative question for this explainer. How do we view humanitarian aid in polarized political environments? When a public gathering becomes deeply contested, can acts of basic service, like handing out water or cooking a meal, ever be seen as purely neutral? Mohammad Junaid's story really encapsulates that blurry line between humanitarianism and political involvement today. Thanks for joining me for this breakdown. Keep questioning, keep analyzing, and I'll catch you next time.